All right, it's time for our final section on biomolecules, and it's time to talk about lipids. Lipids, of course, are fats. Fats. Take starch and fats and put them together and you get French fries. French fries. Okay, back to class. Lipids are fats, also steroids. Steroids are a group of hormones, signaling molecules in the body that are also lipids. Most fats are a glycerol molecule attached to a chain of carbons. They are not polymers. Okay, so all the other things that we've talked about, the carbs, the proteins, nucleic acids, those were all polymers. Fats are different. Okay, fats usually a chain of carbons with hydrogens or a ring structure as with the steroids. Now, all lipids are hydrophobic, meaning that they do not mix well with water, and that is because they are nonpolar molecules. Carbohydrates are usually hydrophilic. Okay, so most carbs are hydrophilic. Philia, meaning likes. So something that is hydrophilic likes water. Something that is hydrophobic hates water. Literally, fear of water. Okay? So oils, lipids do not mix well with water, but you knew that already. So here's a water molecule and here's a fat molecule, and the water molecule says, we just can't be together, and the fat says, is it because I'm fat? And the answer is yeah, in this case. Don't hate people because they're fat. All right, the typical structure of a fat in animals is a triglyceride. So it's a glycerol molecule, which is a 3-carbon molecule. Here they are, 1, 2, 3, with 3 oxygens, 1, 2, 3. The glycerol is then bound to 3 carbon chains, and we call these fatty acid chains. And they're fatty acids because they have a functional group, this double bond O at the top, that can become an OH, which makes an acid. Don't worry about that too much. Just know that these are fatty acid chains. So this is a triglyceride molecule with the glycerol head and then the 3 carbon chains. Notice 2 of these chains have CH2, 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 CH2 all the way down, single bonds between the carbons, and then the other bonds possible on the carbons are used by hydrogen. This one has a double bond between 2 of the carbons. That's going to be really important. Now, fats are really, really good for storing energy. They can store twice as much energy as carbohydrates. So remember, we talked about plants make starch to store energy for times when they need to draw on that energy. Well, fats are actually better at storing energy than carbohydrates are. And so plants that can make oils can actually store more energy in those oils. And of course, in our bodies, adipose tissue, which is what you're looking on here, is made up of these cells that are really big, and all of the cell is mostly just a fat droplet, a droplet of fat. When you need to release this energy, these fat droplets give up that energy, unless they're my fat droplets and adipose cells, in which case they say, no, why don't you just go eat more? All right, now, the difference between these straight chains that have only single bonds and this one that has a kink in it and has a double bond is the difference between saturated and unsaturated fats. And you've probably heard the term saturated, unsaturated fats and had no idea what it meant. Here's what it means. A saturated fat means that the chain is completely saturated with hydrogens. So every place that a carbon could possibly bind, it's bound either to another carbon or to a hydrogen, and there are only single bonds in the chain. Whenever there is a double bond, that is an unsaturated fat. Okay? And there are mono unsaturated fats in which there is a single double bond. Polyunsaturated fats have more than one double bond. Now, when we talk about the fat molecule, any double bond makes the whole fat molecule unsaturated. Okay? This whole fat molecule would be a monounsaturated fat. because there's one double bond. The rest of it is saturated. Functionally, what's important about these chains is that the straight chains are able to pack closely together, whereas the bent chain don't pack as nicely together. Okay? Just like if you throw all the forks and knives and spoons together in the silverware drawer, they don't sit nicely together, but if you put all the forks together, they can nestle up against each other because they all have the same curve, right? Same thing. Saturated fats pack more closely together, and because of that, most solid fats are saturated. Now, notice this says most. We learned in the lab, or we have learned to make unsaturated fats seem saturated. I know, hang on, I'll get back to that. Unsaturated fats are less solid at room temperature, and fats that are very oily at room temperature, like vegetable oil, olive oil, those are polyunsaturated fats. And the reason that they're oil and that they're liquid is because these chains don't sit together nicely, like the silverware in the drawer. Okay, so what did I mean by most solid fats are saturated? So butter is a highly saturated fat. It may have the occasional unsaturated chain, but it's mostly saturated, which is why at room temperature it's solid. Lard is a saturated fat. Crisco is a vegetable oil, a corn oil that has been partially hydrogenated, meaning that hydrogens were added to what was a naturally unsaturated chain. It makes the fat act like a saturated fat, even though naturally it wasn't. It's actually no better for you. We used to think it was. It turns out coagulated grease is coagulated grease, and from a health standpoint, they all suck. Now, let's talk about steroids. Remember, there's two classes of lipids. There's the ones with the chains, and then there are the steroids. And these have a ring structure, okay? So remember, all the corners are carbons with hydrogens bound to them. So these rings are indicative of a steroid. It's still a lipid, meaning that it is a nonpolar molecule that's excellent for energy storage, but in this case, it's going to be a signaling molecule. That's what a hormone is. They send signals from one part of the body to another through the bloodstream. The structure is these 4 fused rings of carbon, and then different functional groups on those rings give the different steroids different functions. Cholesterol is a steroid, which is actually very important to your cells because it helps maintain the shapes of your cells. So cholesterol is so important that if your body doesn't get enough cholesterol, it will make it. So you need some cholesterol in your diet. But if you get too much cholesterol in your diet, then it can build up in the walls of your arteries and damage your heart. So you've got to balance the amount of cholesterol in your diet. Cholesterol can also be converted into other important hormones, including testosterone and estrogen. Notice all of these molecules look really similar, but the functional groups on either end are different. And remember, shape and function go together. When we have a different shape, different functional groups, they're going to function differently. Testosterone is the primary male hormone. In lions, it causes the growth of a larger body and this beautiful mane. In female, it causes a smaller musculature, smaller body structure, and not the mane. In humans, the testosterone is necessary for muscle growth, which is why males and females make testosterone. Males and females also make estrogen because estrogen is important for other body functions. We'll come back to that again as well. Now, steroids are categorized as either anabolic or catabolic. Anabolic steroids, anabolic means build up. So anabolic steroids are synthetic variants of testosterone that are used to build muscle. They have a very important medical use treating people who are getting treatment for cancer and are losing muscle mass because of cancer or because of AIDS. or because their bodies can't make enough muscle tissue on their own. There's some rare conditions in which people don't make enough muscle tissue. Sometimes by giving them anabolic steroids, you can get their cells to make more muscle tissue. So there are medical treatments for it. Now, if you abuse anabolic steroids to try to get more muscles, then you're going to create a lot of health problems. It does increase muscle buildup. It increases bone mass, and it is present in males and females, although females usually make less of it. A woman who makes excessive testosterone is also going to have masculine secondary characteristics, such as a more square jaw and greater muscle mass. Steroid abuse leads to, in addition to increased muscle mass, a bunch of really bad side effects, such as violent mood swings. You may have heard of roid rage, depression, liver damage, high cholesterol, shrunken testicles, which, by the way, not sexy, a reduced sex drive, infertility. In females, it may lead to the end of menstruation, and not in a good way. So athletes should not use steroids except in rare cases and under very close supervision by a doctor. All right, so that's our discussion of lipids. Two categories: steroids, which are hormone. The anabolic steroids build up, especially muscle and bone tissue. Steroids are also important hormones. Testosterone and estrogen are steroids. The other lipids are fats, usually sometimes called fatty acids, and the most common structure is a triglyceride, 3 fatty acid chains. If it's saturated, all of the carbons are bonded to as many hydrogens as possible. It is saturated with hydrogens. If it's unsaturated, then there's a double bond between carbons. Not all the binding places have been taken by hydrogens. Those are our lipids.